The very first review I did on this channel was for this movie, Russ Meyer's The Immoral Mr. Tease. It was the first nudie cutie. In a certain sense, it was the very first modern exploitation film, and so it was my first review. But first are often terrible, and my review is no exception. If you want to get good at something, you have to do it a lot. And I do it a lot. Welcome to Exploitation Reviews, and me, Rob, and today I'm taking a look at The Immoral Mr. Tease from 1959. This movie changed the game, but you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to David F. Friedman.
That the big event that really brought about the golden age of sexploitation was The Immoral Mr. Tease.
Because this is a historically significant film, let's take a brief look at what was happening in exploitation films before this film. In 1934, Hollywood started to enforce the Motion Picture Production Code, also known as the Haze Code, and this code forbade nudity on screen. But exploitation filmmakers didn't care about the Haze Code. Similar to the movie rating system that we have today, the Haze Code was a volunteer, a self-regulating system, and exploitation filmmakers did not volunteer, and they operated well outside that system. But they did care about obscenity laws because violating those could land you in jail.
Welcome to Death Row.
There were a few tricks they employed to show nudity on screen and not go to jail. One of those tricks was to make an educational film, either explicitly educational like the sex hygiene films, or documentary in nature like the burlesque or nudist camp films. Or they would moralize their content. The bad people would get punished or suffer horrible consequences, venereal diseases, pregnancy, stuff like that. In 1954, a movie was released called Garden of Eden. It was a nudist camp film, but different from the nudist camp films that came before, this was not a documentary, it was a narrative film. And it was found to be obscene. But the filmmakers appealed, and the New York State Court of Appeals found that nudity per se is not obscene. And the doors were open. If it was just nudity, that is, no sexual content, just nudity, it was not obscene. So a loophole had been created, and Russ Meyer was about to ram his movie into it. Let's see what he did. By the way, if you'd like to know more about exploitation films before The Immoral Mr. Tease, you can read this book. Alright, let's check out the first modern exploitation film. We open on some nature scenes. A narrator tells us that people retreat back to nature to make peace with themselves. And this opening scene would have been very familiar to exploitation audiences of the day because it's very similar to nudist camp films, which also have a strong return to nature theme. And then Russ makes it clear that he's doing something different.
The heavenly leaves of a gracefully bending tree can help him forget the mad, impetuous, senseless, driving bustle of the city with its traffic, its sirens, and its speed.
The modern era of exploitation films has begun. That narrator, by the way, sounds a little bit like Criswell from those Ed Wood movies.
We are all interested in the future, for that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our lives.
Modern man must, in the course of his endeavors, always keep his eyes on the future.
We meet our title character, Mr. Tease, a modern urban man. He's a traveling salesman specializing in dental equipment. His first stop is at a dentist office, and that secretary is kind of wow. The next day at the beach, Tease runs across a photographer and his model, and we get our first bits of nude bits in the movie. Naturally, with a very nice emphasis on natural. That's nothing that you can see here on YouTube.
Man, I just work here.
But of course, we don't have to stay here. You can now support the channel on Patreon and get access to spicy versions of my reviews. Link is in the description. We get a few more scenes with that model, swimming and playing in the surf and whatnot, but before you get the wrong idea that Russ was making a film just for the male gaze, he gives us a little something for the ladies. The next day, Tease goes to the dentist, gets a sedative, and passes out. He dreams that while the dentist is doing some work, the dental assistant is nude. And then he goes to the fruit stand to handle some melons and get out his banana. And that's not a euphemism, that's what's happening on the screen. He visits a coffee shop and we get the first instance of his particular mental issue. He imagines the women he sees in public naked. For you psychology buffs out there, this is a mental disorder that Tease shares with every man in the world.
Bunch of degenerates.
And this will be the gimmick of the film. Tease just imagines that he sees these women naked. The nudie cuties that follow will have their own gimmicks. X-ray glasses, invisibility potions, and other stupid excuses to see naked people. No touching, remember, just looking. Tease is troubled by these fantasies and he goes to a psychiatrist for help. Do you think she'll help him? Not a chance.
You can't stop something that's inside you.
Let's talk some highlights. Well, the ladies here are really something special. This was one of Russ's contributions to the nudie films of the 50s, beauty. Instead of the diseased genitals of the hygiene films and the flabby derrieres of the septuagenarians in the nudist camp films, we get models worthy of a Playboy centerfold. Not that there weren't some really nice looking people in those nudist camp films, there definitely were, but it's the tone that's different. Before Tease, exploitation films pretended to be educational or moral, but Tease is the immoral Mr. Tease. This film is explicitly and unapologetically sleazy, at least by the standards of the 1950s. It's not pretending to be a documentary or wholesome. It's about a guy who enjoys looking at beautiful naked women. That's it, and that was new. For film, anyway, Hugh Hefner had been doing the same thing in print for a few years at this point. In fact, Russ even shot some models for Playboy magazine. Anyway, the back half of this movie is full of these Playboy-esque models, and they are all stunning. They go sunbathing and tire swinging, and they lounge in hammocks, and Ann Peters goes skinny dipping, and that is all kinds of wow. Obviously, I can't show you that, but I can tell you that one time after I picked up my dry cleaning, I immediately dropped my clothes in a puddle. The plastic saved the clothes, but I ended up with some really wet hangers. Interestingly, even though this film has lots of nudity, the scene that caused it the most trouble for the censor boards back in the day was this one. This, in 1959, was sexual content that had to be removed from the film in some regions. Aside from the ladies, the narrator is occasionally funny, always silly, occasionally funny. But the movie's not perfect. Like an immoral man watching a photographer shoot a nude model on the beach, it has some shortcomings. Well, this thing is mostly interesting for its historical significance. As a film, it's pretty boring by modern standards, and considering what's about to happen in the exploitation world, it's even pretty boring by the standards of the 1960s. I mean, it is wild that only about 10 years separates this film from Michael Finlay's Flesh trilogy. That's a lot of progress in 10 years. I don't know, overall this thing, especially at the beginning, is pretty boring and repetitive, and the music is kind of annoying. But the film does have a pretty solid back half.